Reborn, she married her best friend's husband to seek justice. What if your life looked perfect on the outside, but inside it was a ticking time bomb? That was Leah Carter's world picture, perfect, yet secretly crumbling. Leah was the kind of woman who believed in love and loyalty. She had a husband she adored, Victor, and a best friend she trusted, Nina. Together they were her world, her safe space, or so she thought. Leah's days were filled with the small joys of life. She loved mornings on her balcony with a cup of coffee, watching the sun paint the sky. She worked hard, cared deeply for her family, and was always the one to step in when someone needed help. Her husband, Victor, was charming, at least when others were watching. Behind closed doors he was colder, more distant, and at times even dismissive. But Leah brushed it off. Every marriage has its ups and downs, she reminded herself. And Nina was like a sister, her confidante. They'd been inseparable since they were kids, sharing everything from childhood dreams to teenage heartbreaks. If there was one person Leah felt she could count on, it was Nina. But here's the thing about masks, they always slip. Victor started working late. At first Leah didn't think much of it. He had a demanding job after all, but soon the late nights became a pattern. His phone calls became more frequent, and his demeanor more secret. Every time his phone buzzed, he would step out of the room to answer, his voice a low whisper. Leah, trying not to jump to conclusions, asked him about it. Victor's response was always the same, a disarming smile and a casual, "It's just work stuff." But something about his smile didn't feel right. It wasn't warm. It wasn't honest. Nina, on the other hand, was always her bright, bubbly self. She was the type to show up at Leah's doorstep, unannounced, with a bottle of wine, ready to talk about life and love. If Leah ever voiced her concerns about Victor's late nights or secretive behavior, Nina would laugh it off. "Oh, Leah, you're overthinking. Victor adores you. You have nothing to worry about," and for a while Leah believed her. Why wouldn't she? Nina had always been her rock. But then there was the necklace. One chilly evening, Leah was tidying up when she found an expensive necklace in Victor's coat pocket. Her heart skipped a beat. Was this for her? Was Victor planning a surprise? She decided not to mention it, hoping it would appear on their anniversary. But when the day came and went with no sign of the necklace, Leah felt a pang of disappointment. Maybe he returned it, she told herself. Or maybe it was for his mother. Victor often did nice things for his family. Still, doubts began to creep in. Leah started paying closer attention, noticing things she had ignored before. The late nights, the sudden disappearances of money from their joint account, the distant way Victor looked at her, as if she were a stranger. And then, one day, Leah saw something that made her stomach drop. It was a Saturday afternoon, and Leah was out running errands when she spotted Victor and Nina at a cafe. At first she thought it was a coincidence. After all, they were friends. But the way they sat too close, too comfortable, and the way they laughed together, it didn't feel right. Leah froze. She wanted to walk up to them to say something, but she couldn't. Her heart felt like it was shattering into 1,000 pieces right there on the sidewalk. She drove home that day in silence, her mind racing. Every conversation, every moment she'd dismissed as unimportant, came rushing back with new meaning. The time Nina had jokingly called Victor her dream man. The way Victor seemed more cheerful when Nina was around. Were they laughing at her all along? The thought was unbearable. Still, she stayed silent. She wanted to believe that her life was still intact, that her husband loved her, and that her best friend had her back, because the truth was too painful to face. It's hard to accept that the people you trust the most could be the ones holding the knife behind your back, but the weight of suspicion was eating her alive. That evening she tried to act normal, setting the table for dinner as if everything was fine. Victor came home late again, offering a half-hearted excuse about work. Leah nodded, her heart heavy with questions she didn't dare ask. Then, one night, everything changed. Leah was cleaning up after dinner, her hands submerged in soapy water, when Victor walked into the kitchen. His face was cold, his eyes distant. "We need to talk," he said, his tone flat. Leah's heart started pounding. There was something about the way he spoke, detached, almost robotic, that made her stomach twist. She turned to face him, a dish towel in her hands. "What's wrong?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady. Victor didn't answer right away. Instead, he leaned against the counter, his gaze fixed on the floor. The silence stretched on, heavy and suffocating, and then finally he looked up, his expression unreadable. "There's something I need to tell you." At that moment, Leah felt the air in the room shift. Her perfect facade was about to shatter, and she knew deep down that life as she knew it was about to change forever. The shocking betrayal. Leah stood frozen in her kitchen as Victor's words hung in the air. "There's something I need to tell you." Her mind raced, bracing for the worst, yet hoping it wasn't as bad as she feared. Maybe he had a financial issue to confess, or maybe he was just stressed from work, but the coldness in his tone was suffocating. Victor took a deep breath, his eyes avoiding hers. "I've been seeing someone else," he said flatly, as though it were a trivial detail about his day. Leah felt her heart stop. For a moment she couldn't process what he had just said. "What? What are you saying?" she stammered, her voice barely above a whisper. He leaned against the counter, his posture relaxed, almost nonchalant. "Nina and I have been together for a while now. It just happened. We didn't plan it." Leah's legs nearly gave out beneath her. Nina? Her best friend? The person she'd trusted with every secret, every moment of vulnerability? The betrayal hit her like a freight train. Her stomach churned, and her chest tightened as the realization sunk in. This wasn't just a mistake. This was calculated. "You're joking," right? Leah managed to say, her voice trembling. She clung to the hope that this was some cruel prank, some misunderstanding. Victor didn't flinch. "No, Leah, I'm not joking." The room seemed to spin around her. Every memory of their relationship, every shared laugh, every promise exchanged, it all felt like a lie. How could you?" she whispered. "And Nina, she's supposed to be my best friend." Victor sighed, almost irritated by her reaction. "Look, I didn't want you to find out this way, but Nina and I were in love. It's different with her." The words cut deeper than Leah thought possible. She felt anger bubbling beneath her shock and heartbreak. "So what does this mean? You're leaving me for her?" she demanded, her voice rising. Victor's expression hardened. "Not yet. There's still my mother to think about. You know she needs someone to care for her. Nina and I agreed that it's better for you to stay until things settle." Leah's mouth dropped open. "You're telling me you're staying with me just so I can take care of your mother while you, what, play house with Nina behind my back?" "It's not like that," Victor snapped, his frustration evident. "You're overreacting." "Overreacting?" Leah's voice echoed in the kitchen. "You've been cheating on me with my best friend, and now you want me to stick around and play the role of a caregiver. Are you even hearing yourself?" Victor ran a hand through his hair, exasperated. "This isn't easy for me either, Leah. I didn't ask for this, but we can handle this like adults. There's no need to make it messy." Leah felt as though she were in a nightmare. How could someone she had loved and trusted be so cold, so calculating? But then Victor said something that pushed her over the edge. "It's not like you'll be around forever anyway," he muttered under his breath, almost as though he hadn't meant to say it aloud. Leah's blood turned to ice. "What did you just say?" she demanded, her voice low and dangerous. Victor hesitated, but then he straightened, meeting her gaze with an unsettling calmness. "I mean, look, Nina and I took out a life insurance policy on you a while back. If anything happens to you, it'll help cover expenses and, well, we can start fresh." The room went silent. Leah stared at him, disbelief etched into every corner of her face. "You're kidding," she said finally, her voice barely audible. But Victor didn't deny it. His silence spoke volumes. Her mind raced as the pieces began to fit together. The late-night phone calls, the secretive behavior, the sudden push for her to take risks she wouldn't normally take, it all made sense now. They weren't just betraying her, they were planning her demise. The betrayal burned like acid in her veins. She had given everything to this man, trusted him with her heart, and he had not only broken it but weaponized it against her. And Nina? The person she had considered her sister? The thought of their betrayal was too much to bear. "Get out," Leah said, her voice trembling with rage. Victor didn't move. "Leah," I said. "Get out," she screamed, her body shaking with fury. She grabbed the nearest object, a glass, and hurled it at the wall near him. It shattered, sending shards flying across the kitchen floor. Victor raised his hands defensively but didn't argue. "Fine," he muttered. "I'll go. But we're not done talking about this." "Yes, we are," Leah spat, her voice full of venom. She watched as he walked out, the door slamming behind him. As soon as he was gone, Leah collapsed onto the kitchen floor, sobbing uncontrollably. Her world had crumbled in an instant. The people she had loved most had turned out to be the ones who wanted to destroy her. For hours she sat there, her thoughts spiraling. She replayed every moment, every conversation, searching for signs she had missed. How had she been so blind? How had she trusted people so completely, only to have them betray her in the cruelest way possible? But as the night stretched on, something shifted inside her. The despair that had consumed her began to give way to something else. Anger, determination, a fire ignited in her chest, burning away the helplessness. She wasn't going to let them win. They wanted to destroy her, to use her, and discard her like she was nothing. But they had underestimated her. Leah Carter wasn't going down without a fight. "I'll show them," she whispered to herself, her voice steady despite the tears still streaming down her face. "They think they've beaten me, but they have no idea who they're dealing with." That night Leah made a vow. She would uncover every lie, every secret, and make Victor and Nina regret the day they ever decided to betray her. This wasn't just about survival anymore. This was about justice, and Leah Carter was ready to take back her life, no matter what it took. The tragic accident and rebirth. Leah spent the next few days in a daze. Every moment felt surreal, as if she were walking through a nightmare she couldn't wake up from. Her home, once a place of comfort, now felt suffocating. The walls seemed to echo Victor's words, the betrayal replaying in her mind like a broken record. Nina's laugh haunted her dreams, twisting into something sinister. She felt hollow, betrayed, and utterly alone. Leah tried to focus on work and the everyday things that used to ground her, but nothing seemed to help. The anger and hurt consumed her. Every time her phone buzzed, she flinched, half expecting it to be Victor or Nina. But the texts and calls from Victor stopped entirely, as if he had already written her off. She hadn't heard from Nina either, which somehow hurt more. One evening, Leah sat on her living room couch, staring at the TV without really watching it. Her mind was spiraling again, going over every detail: the life insurance policy, the cold, calculating tone Victor had used, the way Nina had been in on it from the start. They hadn't just betrayed her, they had planned to erase her permanently. The thought sent chills down her spine. Were they still planning something? Would Victor or Nina come back to finish what they started? Leah's eyes darted toward the windows, and she quickly got up to double-check that all the doors were locked. Paranoia started to creep in, and she hated it. This wasn't who she was. She was stronger than this. But that strength felt far away right now. The next morning, Leah decided she needed to get out of the house. She grabbed her keys and headed for the car, determined to clear her head. A drive along the coastline might help, she thought. The sea had always been a source of peace for her. As she drove, the salty breeze flowing through the open windows began to ease some of the tension in her chest. For the first time in days, she felt like she could breathe. She turned up the music, letting the familiar tunes drown out her racing thoughts. But as the sun began to set, Leah realized she had driven much farther than she intended. The road ahead curved sharply along a cliffside, the ocean crashing against the rocks below. The beauty of the scene was breathtaking, but Leah's hands tightened on the steering wheel. The drop was steep, and the guardrails looked flimsy. Her phone buzzed on the passenger seat. Instinctively, she glanced over. It was Victor. Her heart raced as she saw his name flashing on the screen. Was he calling to apologize? To threaten her? Her car veered slightly, and the tires screeched against the edge of the road. Leah's heart pounded as she quickly grabbed the wheel, jerking the car back into her lane. Her breathing was ragged as she pulled over to the side of the road, her hands trembling. She sat there for a moment, staring at her phone. Finally, she picked it up and answered. "What do you want, Victor?" she snapped, her voice trembling with anger and fear. His tone was cold, as usual. "I just wanted to check in," he said. "Make sure you're okay." Leah almost laughed. "You're worried about me now? After everything you've done?" "I don't want things to get out of hand," he said, his voice calm, almost calculated. "We both need to stay level-headed about this." Level-headed? Leah's voice cracked. "You and Nina took out a life insurance policy on me. What part of that is level-headed?" Victor didn't respond right away. When he did, his tone was chillingly even. "You're overthinking it, Leah. It's not what you think." Her grip tightened on the phone. "Stay away from me, Victor," she said, her voice low and firm. "I mean it." She ended the call before he could respond, her hands shaking as she tossed the phone onto the passenger seat. She leaned back against the headrest, trying to steady her breathing, but something about Victor's tone left her uneasy. He wasn't worried about her well-being, he was checking to see if she was still alive. Leah shook her head, trying to push the thought away. She started the car again, determined to get home, but as she rounded another curve, she felt the car jerk. A sickening crunch followed, and the steering wheel spun wildly in her hands. Her heart stopped as she realized what was happening. Her brakes weren't responding. The car careened toward the edge of the cliff, the guardrails rushing toward her. Leah screamed, gripping the wheel as she tried to swerve, but it was too late. The car broke through the guardrails, the world tilting as she plunged toward the rocks below. For a moment, everything seemed to slow down. The sound of the ocean roared in her ears, and the horizon spun wildly in front of her. Leah's life flashed before her eyes, not just the good moments, but the regrets, the times she had trusted the wrong people, the dreams she had abandoned. She thought of her mother's smile, of the way Ethan Graves had looked at her that one time in college, of the life she had wanted but never fought for. And then, everything went black. Leah gasped as she opened her eyes, her chest heaving. For a moment she thought she was in a hospital, the stark white surroundings blinding her. But as she sat up, she realized something was off. The room wasn't a hospital room, it was her old bedroom. Her breath caught in her throat as she looked around. The posters on the walls, the mismatched furniture, the old lamp on her desk, it was all exactly as it had been years ago. Slowly, she got up and walked to the mirror. Her reflection stared back at her, but it wasn't the face she had grown used to. Her cheeks were fuller, her hair longer. She looked younger. Panic surged through her. What was happening? Was this a dream? A hallucination? Her mind raced as she tried to make sense of it. Then she saw the calendar on her desk. The date stopped her cold. It was 7 years earlier. Leah stumbled back, her heart pounding. This couldn't be real. She touched the desk, the bed, and the walls, trying to convince herself it was a dream, but everything felt solid, real. She sat down on the bed, her head in her hands. Slowly, the realization began to sink in. She wasn't dead. She had been given a second chance, a chance to rewrite her story. The fear and confusion began to give way to something else. Determination. This time she wasn't going to be a victim. This time she was going to take control. A new purpose. Leah sat on the edge of her bed, her fingers gripping the blanket tightly. Her heart was still racing as the shock of her situation settled in. How was this possible? Was she dreaming? Was this some strange hallucination? She pinched her arm hard and winced at the sting. No, this was real. She was really here in her childhood bedroom 7 years in the past. She glanced around the room, her eyes scanning the familiar walls. Her favorite band's poster still hung by the door, slightly crooked. The small shelf by her desk was cluttered with notebooks and trinkets she hadn't seen in years. Even the faint smell of lavender from the old diffuser she used every night lingered in the air. It was all exactly as she remembered. Leah stood and walked to the mirror on her dresser. The reflection staring back at her took her breath away. She touched her face gently, her fingertips brushing against her fuller cheeks and unlined skin. Her hair, long and shiny, fell in waves past her shoulders. She was looking at her younger self before the years of betrayal and heartbreak had taken their toll. "This is insane," she whispered to herself, her voice shaky. "How is this even possible?" Her eyes landed on the calendar on her desk, and she froze. The date stared back at her, bold and undeniable. 7 years earlier. She sank into the chair by her desk, her mind racing. If this was real, if she truly was back in the past, then this was her chance. A chance to rewrite everything. Leah's heart began to pound again, but this time it wasn't from fear. It was from the flicker of something she hadn't felt in a long time: hope. For the first time in years, she had a say in what happened next. She wasn't trapped in the life Victor and Nina had built on lies. She could stop it before it even started. But the question was, where to begin? The next morning, Leah woke up with the sunlight streaming through her window. For a moment she lay there, staring at the ceiling, half expecting to wake up in her old reality. But everything was still the same: her old room, her old life, her younger self. It was real. She swung her legs over the side of the bed, her mind buzzing with possibilities. She thought about Victor, about the charming, seemingly perfect man who would one day shatter her heart. Then there was Nina, her best friend, who would turn out to be the ultimate betrayer. Leah's jaw tightened as she thought about them. Not this time. This time she would stay 2 steps ahead. Leah grabbed a notebook from her desk and began scribbling down everything she could remember: important dates, events, and moments she had overlooked the first time. She thought about the first time she met Victor and the way he had swept her off her feet. This time she wouldn't fall for his charm. She would see through the lies. Then there was Nina. Leah's heart ached as she wrote her name down. They had shared so much: laughs, tears, secrets. Nina had been like family to her, but now Leah knew better. She would keep her distance, guard her heart, and watch for the signs she had missed before. But it wasn't just about avoiding betrayal. Leah wanted more than that. She wanted to build a life she could be proud of, one where she wasn't dependent on anyone else. She thought about her career, about the dreams she had put on hold for Victor. This time she wouldn't let anyone hold her back. Leah sat back in her chair, staring at the list she had made. It wasn't just a plan, it was a declaration. This was her second chance, and she wasn't going to waste it. Leah's first test came sooner than she expected. That afternoon, as she walked through the bustling streets of Riverview, she spotted a familiar figure up ahead. Her breath caught in her throat. It was Victor. He was standing by a cafe, his phone pressed to his ear, his charming smile on full display. For a moment, Leah froze. Her instincts screamed at her to turn around, to avoid him altogether. But then she remembered why she was here. This wasn't about running away. This was about taking control. She took a deep breath and walked toward him. As she approached, Victor noticed her and ended his call, slipping his phone into his pocket. "Leah," he said, his voice warm and familiar. "Wow, it's been a while." Leah forced a smile, her heart pounding in her chest. "Yeah, it has," she said, her tone even. "How have you been?" Victor's smile widened, and he launched into a story about his new job, his plans, and how lucky he had been lately. Leah listened politely, nodding in all the right places, but inside she was analyzing every word. She could see it now, the charm, the practiced lines, the way he made everything sound so This was the man who would one day betray her, but not this time. When Victor asked if she wanted to grab a coffee and catch up, Leah hesitated for only a moment. Then she smiled and said, sure, she wasn't going to fall for his act, but she also wasn't going to tip him off. If she played her cards right, she could learn more about him, about his intentions, and stay ahead of whatever game he was playing. As they sat in the cafe, Leah kept the conversation light, steering it toward his plans and ambitions. She noticed the way he talked about himself and how he always made himself the center of the story. She had missed it before, but now it was glaringly obvious. By the time they said their goodbyes, Leah felt a strange mix of emotions. Part of her was proud of how she had handled herself, calm, composed, and in control, but another part of her felt the weight of what lay ahead. This was just the beginning. That evening, Leah sat by her window, watching the city lights twinkle in the distance. Her mind was buzzing with everything she had learned that day, with the plans she was forming. It wouldn't be easy. Victor was clever, and Nina was even more so, but Leah had something she hadn't had before: knowledge. And with that knowledge came power. As she stared out at the city, Leah felt a flicker of determination ignite within her. This was her chance to rewrite her story, to take back her life. She didn't know what the future held, but one thing was certain: she wasn't going to let anyone decide her fate for her. Leah smiled faintly, the fire in her chest growing stronger. This was her second chance, and she was going to make it count. Strategic beginnings. Leah sat in her favorite corner of a quiet cafe, her notebook open in front of her. She was sketching out her next moves, each word she wrote feeling like a small victory. This wasn't just a plan, it was her armor. She was no longer the naive woman who blindly trusted the wrong people. She was rebuilding herself from the ground up. The first thing on her list was simple: distance herself from Victor and Nina. She had no intention of cutting ties too quickly that would only tip them off. Instead, she needed to be subtle, to create enough space to observe their actions without drawing attention to herself. The key was to stay close enough to keep an eye on them, but far enough to avoid their influence. As Leah sipped her coffee, she thought about Victor's reaction when they ran into each other the day before. He had been charming as always, his words perfectly calculated to disarm her. But this time Leah saw through the facade. She saw the man who would one day betray her, the man who had already started laying the groundwork for his deceit. Her grip on her pen tightened. Not this time, she thought. This time she would be ready. Later that week, Leah decided to test her first strategy. She called Nina and suggested they meet for lunch. As the phone rang, Leah felt a pang of sadness. She couldn't help but think of the Nina she used to know, the friend who had laughed with her, cried with her, and stood by her through so many milestones. But now Leah understood the truth. Nina's friendship had been a mask, hiding a woman who was capable of betraying her in the cruelest way possible. Nina's cheerful voice greeted her when she answered. "I've been meaning to call you. How are you?" Leah forced a smile, even though Nina couldn't see her. "I'm good. Busy, but good. I was thinking we should catch up. Lunch this week." Nina didn't hesitate. "Absolutely. How about tomorrow?" Leah agreed, jotting down the time and place. As she hung up, she felt a mix of anticipation and dread. This wasn't just a lunch. This was a chance to gather information, to see what Nina was already planning, and to remind herself of what she was fighting against. The next day, Leah arrived at the restaurant a few minutes early, choosing a table near the window. She ordered a drink and waited, her notebook away in her bag. When Nina arrived, she smiled, her energy bubbly as ever. For a moment, Leah almost forgot what she knew. Almost. "You look amazing," Nina said as she slid into the seat across from Leah. "Seriously, what's your secret?" Leah smiled politely. "Just taking care of myself, As the conversation unfolded, Leah paid close attention to Nina's words, her tone, and even her body language. Nina was as charming as ever, but Leah noticed the subtle ways she steered the conversation, always redirecting the focus back to herself. It was a skill Leah hadn't noticed before, but now, with her eyes wide open, it was impossible to miss. "So," Nina said, leaning forward slightly, "what's new with you? Any big plans?" Leah hesitated for a split second before answering. "Not really. Just focusing on work and, figuring things out." Nina nodded, her smile unwavering. But Leah could see it now, the calculating look in her eyes, the way she was already filing away every word Leah said for future use. By the time the lunch was over, Leah felt drained but victorious. She hadn't revealed anything important, and she had managed to get Nina talking about her own life. As they hugged goodbye, Leah's mind was already working through the pieces of the puzzle Nina had unknowingly handed her. That evening, Leah sat by her desk, reviewing the notes she had scribbled down after lunch. Nina had mentioned a new job opportunity, one that sounded suspiciously tied to Victor's company. She had also dropped a few hints about her plans for the future, plans that didn't seem to include Leah. It was subtle, but it was there. Leah closed her notebook, her heart heavy. It hurt to see Nina this way, to realize how little their friendship had meant to her. But Leah reminded herself why she was doing this. This wasn't just about Nina or Victor. This was about taking back control of her life, about rewriting her story. The next step on Leah's list was to strengthen her own position. She thought about her career, about the dreams she had put on hold for Victor. This time she wouldn't let anyone derail her. She began researching new opportunities, looking for ways to build a future that was hers and hers alone. Leah also thought about Ethan Graves. She hadn't seen him in years, but she remembered the kindness in his eyes, the way he had always treated her with respect. Back then she had been too caught up in her relationship with Victor to notice him. But now things were different. Maybe it was time to reconnect. The following week, Leah found herself standing outside a sleek office building, her resume clutched in her hand. She had an interview scheduled with a company that specialized in marketing, a field she had always been passionate about. As she walked through the doors, she felt a surge of confidence. This was her chance to prove to herself that she could do this, that she could build a life that wasn't tied to anyone else. The interview went well, and by the time Leah walked out of the building, she felt a sense of accomplishment she hadn't felt in years. This was just the beginning, but it was a step in the right direction. As Leah drove home, she thought about everything she had accomplished so far. She was creating distance from Victor and Nina, focusing on her own goals, and taking control of her future. It wasn't easy, and there were still moments of doubt and fear. But for the first time in a long time, Leah felt like she was on the right path. That evening, as Leah sat by her window, watching the city lights twinkle in the distance, she felt a sense of calm. Her journey was just beginning, and there were still so many challenges ahead, but Leah was ready for them. She wasn't the same woman she had been before. She was stronger, wiser, and determined to make the most of her second chance. This time she wasn't just surviving, she was thriving, building trust with Ethan. Leah hesitated as she stared at the glowing screen of her phone. It had been years since she last spoke to Ethan Graves, but his name still brought a sense of calm. Ethan had always been different. While Victor exuded charm that felt too polished, Ethan was genuine. He had been the quiet presence in her life back then, a friend who never demanded but always offered support. If anyone could help her find clarity now, it was him. After taking a deep breath, Leah typed out a message. "Hi Ethan, it's been a long time. I was wondering if you'd like to catch up. Coffee sometime." She stared at the message, her thumb hovering over the send button. Was this a good idea? She shook off the doubts and hit send before she could change her mind. Almost immediately, her phone buzzed. Ethan's reply was short but warm. "Leah, great to hear from you. Coffee sounds perfect. Name the time and place." Leah smiled, relief washing over her. This was a step forward, one that felt right. The next afternoon, Leah arrived at a cozy cafe near the park. She chose a table by the window, her nerves jittering. What if Ethan had changed? What if he was no longer the kind, thoughtful person she remembered? She didn't have much time to dwell on the thought because, moments later, the door swung open and there he was. Ethan's presence filled the room in a quiet, unassuming way. He looked just as she remembered, though a little more mature. His warm smile was exactly as she pictured it in her mind. "Leah," he said, his voice steady and genuine. "It's been too long." Leah stood and hugged him briefly. "It really has," she said, her smile widening. "Thanks for meeting me." As they settled into their seats, the initial small talk flowed easily. Ethan asked about her family, her work, and how she had been. Leah kept her answers vague, not wanting to delve too deeply into the chaos of her recent past. Instead, she turned the conversation toward him. "I heard you started your own business," she said, genuinely curious. "How's that going?" Ethan's face lit up as he talked about his small but growing architecture firm. He spoke with a quiet passion, his words humble but full of pride. Leah found herself relaxing as she listened, her guard lowering just a little. As the afternoon went on, their conversation grew more personal. Leah began to share bits and pieces of her life, careful not to reveal too much about Victor or Nina. Still, Ethan seemed to sense the weight she was carrying. "You seem different," he said gently. "Not in a bad way, just like you're carrying something heavy." Leah hesitated, her fingers tracing the rim of her coffee cup. Should she tell him? Could she trust him with the truth? She looked into his eyes and saw nothing but sincerity. It's complicated, she admitted. I've made some mistakes. Trusted the wrong people. Ethan nodded, his expression understanding. We've all been there. The important thing is what you do next. His words struck a chord. Leah felt a lump rise in her throat, but she pushed it down. I'm trying to fix things, she said quietly, to take control of my life again. Ethan smiled. And you will. You've always been stronger than you think. Leah felt a warmth spread through her chest. For the first time in weeks, she felt seen not as a victim, but as someone capable of rising above her circumstances. Over the next few weeks, Leah and Ethan began meeting regularly. Sometimes it was coffee, other times a walk in the park, and once, a spontaneous visit to an art exhibit Ethan had mentioned in passing. Each interaction felt like a breath of fresh air, a reminder that not all relationships were built on deception. Ethan never pried into her past or pushed her to share more than she was ready to. Instead, he offered quiet support, encouraging her to focus on her goals and take small steps toward rebuilding her life. One evening, as they sat on a bench overlooking the river, Leah found herself opening up about Victor and Nina. She told Ethan everything: the betrayal, the life insurance policy, the accident, and her inexplicable return to the past. To her surprise, Ethan didn't look shocked. Instead, he nodded thoughtfully. You're lucky, he said after a moment. Not many people get a second chance like this. You have the power to change everything. Leah let out a shaky breath. It's overwhelming sometimes, she admitted. I feel like I have to be perfect this time, like I can't afford to mess up. Ethan shook his head. You don't have to be perfect, Leah. You just have to keep moving forward, one step at a time. His words settled over her like a comforting blanket. She realized then how much she had missed having someone like Ethan in her life, someone who believed in her without conditions. As Leah's trust in Ethan grew, she began to involve him in her plans. She told him about her career aspirations and her determination to cut ties with Victor and Nina without raising suspicion. Ethan listened intently, offering practical advice and encouragement. Start by setting boundaries, he suggested during one of their conversations. Don't give them access to your emotions or your time. Focus on what you can control. Leah nodded, his words sparking new ideas in her mind. You're right. I've spent so much energy reacting to them. It's time to take the lead. And together, they brainstormed strategies for navigating her complicated situation. Ethan's calm, logical approach balanced Leah's fiery determination, creating a partnership that felt natural and empowering. One evening, after a particularly long conversation about her goals, Leah paused and looked at Ethan. Why are you helping me so much, she asked, her voice soft. You don't owe me anything. Ethan met her gaze, his expression serious. Because I believe in you, he said simply, and because everyone deserves someone in their corner. Leah felt tears prick her eyes, but she blinked them away. Thank you, she whispered. I don't think I've ever had anyone in my corner like this before. Ethan smiled. Well, now you do. As Leah drove home that night, she felt a renewed sense of purpose. She wasn't alone in this fight. With Ethan by her side, she felt stronger and more capable of facing the challenges ahead. But she also knew the road wouldn't be easy. Victor and Nina weren't the kind of people who would let her go without a fight. They were dangerous, and Leah couldn't afford to underestimate them. Still, as she parked her car and stepped into her apartment, Leah couldn't help but smile. For the first time in a long time, she felt like she was winning not just against Victor and Nina, but against the version of herself that had once felt powerless. And this time, she wasn't backing down, confronting the past. Leah stood outside the grand, looming house she once called home. Her father's estate hadn't changed much. Its brick facade was still as intimidating as ever, the kind of place designed to impress and control. She clenched her fists, her heart pounding in her chest. This was a confrontation she had avoided in her first life, but not this time. Her father's manipulation had played a huge role in her downfall, and she wasn't going to let history repeat itself. Taking a deep breath, Leah pushed open the heavy iron gate and walked up the cobblestone path. Each step felt heavier than the last, but her resolve was strong. She wasn't the same timid daughter who had once craved her father's approval. She had seen what his greed and ambition had cost her, and she wasn't going to let him use her again. Inside, the house was eerily quiet, the kind of quiet that carried tension. Leah's footsteps echoed as she walked into the study, where she knew her father would be. Sure enough, he was seated behind his massive oak desk, surrounded by books and files, his focus on the stack of papers in front of him. Leah, he said without looking up, what brings you here? The coldness in his tone was like a slap. Leah straightened her shoulders, refusing to be intimidated. We need to talk, she said firmly. Her father finally looked up, his piercing eyes narrowing. Talk about what? Leah crossed her arms, taking a step closer. About the way you've used me my entire life. About how you treated me like a pawn in your business deals instead of a daughter. Her father's brow furrowed, a flicker of annoyance crossing his face. What nonsense are you talking about now? Leah's chest tightened, but she didn't back down. You know exactly what I mean. Marrying me off to Victor wasn't about my happiness, it was about what he could do for your company. Her father leaned back in his chair, his expression unreadable. And what if it was, he said calmly. You had a good life, didn't you? A wealthy husband, stability. Leah cut him off. It was all a lie. Victor never cared about me. And you knew it. You didn't care either, as long as it benefited you. The room fell silent, the tension thick. Leah's father stared at her for a long moment before finally speaking. You're being dramatic, Leah. Business is business. That's how the world works. No, Dad, Leah said, her voice shaking but steady. That's how you work. You don't see people, you see assets, but I'm not one of your investments anymore. Her father's expression darkened, but Leah didn't give him a chance to respond. I'm done being your pawn, she said, her voice firm. I'm building a life for myself now, and I won't let you or anyone else manipulate me again. As Leah turned to leave, her father's voice stopped her. You think you can do this on your own, he said coldly. You'll come crawling back the moment you realize how hard the world really is. Leah froze for a moment, his words stinging like they always had. But then she turned back to him, her eyes blazing. Maybe I will struggle, she admitted, but at least it will be my struggle, not yours. She walked out of the study, her heart pounding with a mix of fear and triumph. She knew this wouldn't be the last time she faced her father's wrath, but it was a start. For the first time she had stood up to him and she had won. The confrontation with her father left Leah emotionally drained, but it also filled her with a renewed sense of purpose. She had faced one of the most intimidating figures in her life and come out stronger. Now it was time to channel that strength into her next steps. Leah spent the following days focusing on her career and relationships. She reached out to a few old colleagues, rebuilding connections she had lost during her years with Victor. To her surprise, many of them were eager to catch up and support her. It reminded Leah that not everyone in her life had betrayed her. There were still good people she could rely on. One of those people was Ethan. After hearing about her confrontation with her father, he offered to help her strategize. They met at a small diner one evening, the kind of place that felt warm and safe. So what's next on your list? Ethan asked as they shared a plate of fries. Leah thought for a moment before answering. I need to create financial independence. My father always controlled my money, and Victor took advantage of that. I can't let that happen again. Ethan nodded. Smart. Do you have a plan? Leah smiled faintly. Sort of. I've been researching investment opportunities and budgeting. It's a start, but I could use some guidance. Ethan leaned forward, his expression thoughtful. I know someone who could help. A friend of mine runs financial planning workshops. They're all about empowering people to take control of their money. Leah's eyes lit up. That sounds perfect. Can you introduce me? Of course, Ethan said with a grin. Anything to help. Over the next few weeks, Leah threw herself into building her independence. She attended workshops, read books, and slowly began to understand the world of finance. It was intimidating at first, but with Ethan's encouragement, she pushed through the doubts. Each step she took felt like a victory. She opened her own bank account, set up a savings plan, and even began exploring business ideas she had once dismissed as impossible. The more she learned, the more empowered she felt. But as Leah's confidence grew, so did the obstacle. Her father, true to his nature, wasn't ready to let her go. He began calling her, leaving messages laced with guilt and manipulation. You're making a mistake, he would say. You'll regret this, Leah. Leah deleted the messages without listening to the end. She had heard it all before, and she wasn't going to let his words hold her back. Each time she ignored his calls, it felt like another chain breaking. One evening, Leah sat in her small apartment, surrounded by papers and notes. She was working on a presentation for a potential client, her first big opportunity since starting her freelance marketing career. The stakes were high, but Leah felt ready. Her phone buzzed, and she glanced at the screen. It was Ethan. How's the project coming along? He asked when she answered. Almost done, Leah said, smiling. Just putting the finishing touches on it. I have no doubt it'll be amazing, Ethan said, his voice warm. You're really doing it, Leah. You're taking control. Leah felt a surge of gratitude. Thanks, Ethan. I couldn't have done this without you. Yes, you could, he said firmly. But I'm glad I get to be here to see it. As they hung up, Leah felt a sense of pride she hadn't felt in years. She was no longer the woman who let others dictate her life. She was reclaiming her power, one step at a time. First wins against Victor and Nina. Leah had always believed in karma, but in her first life she had waited too long for it to strike. This time she wasn't leaving things to fate. She was determined to take action, to ensure Victor and Nina faced the consequences of their betrayal. Her chance came sooner than she expected. One morning, while scrolling through social media, Leah stumbled upon a photo that stopped her in her tracks. It was Nina, smiling brightly at an event hosted by one of Victor's business partners. In the background, Leah spotted Victor, his arm casually resting on Nina's chair. They looked comfortable, too comfortable, like a couple who didn't care who noticed. Leah's chest tightened. She remembered how they had flaunted their relationship in her past life, pretending it was innocent until the truth exploded. This time she wouldn't let them get that far. Leah spent the next few days quietly gathering information. She reached out to old contacts from Victor's company, presenting herself as curious but uninvolved. People were surprisingly open and eager to share juicy tidbits about workplace gossip. It didn't take long for Leah to piece together that Victor had been positioning Nina for a promotion in his department, a promotion she didn't qualify for. The thought made Leah's blood boil. Nina wasn't just inserting herself into Victor's personal life, she was using him to climb the corporate ladder. Leah couldn't let that happen, not only because it was wrong but because it would give Nina even more power to manipulate and hurt others. Leah decided it was time to act. The next day, Leah found herself sitting in a bustling cafe, sipping a latte as she waited for someone who could help. Max, a mutual acquaintance from her past, had always been sharp and observant. He worked in a different department at Victor's company but was well connected. Leah remembered how Max had once hinted at knowing more about Victor's shady dealings, though she had brushed it off back then. Leah, Max said as he slid into the seat across from her, his expression curious. "It's been ages. What's this about?" Leah smiled warmly. "I just wanted to catch up," she said lightly, "and maybe pick your brain about something." Max raised an eyebrow. "Pick away." Leah leaned forward, lowering her voice slightly. "I've been hearing rumors about some favoritism in Victor's department, specifically involving Nina. Have you heard anything?" Max smirked, his eyes glinting with intrigue. "Oh, I've heard plenty. Word is Victor's been bending over backward to get Nina that promotion. People are starting to talk." Leah nodded thoughtfully, trying to hide her excitement. "Interesting. Do you think there's proof? Something official?" Max shrugged. "Maybe. I know HR's been keeping an eye on things. If they find anything, it won't end well for Victor or Nina." Leah's mind raced. This was the opening she needed. "Thanks, Max, that's really helpful." Max tilted his head. "You're not just curious, are you?" Leah smiled innocently. "Let's just say I'm invested in the truth." Armed with this new information, Leah began strategizing. She didn't want to expose Victor and Nina outright, not yet. Instead, she wanted to plant seeds of doubt, to let their own actions unravel their plans. Leah reached out to a friend who worked in HR at Victor's company. Over coffee, she casually mentioned hearing whispers about favoritism and suggested it might be worth looking into. Her friend's eyes widened with interest, and Leah knew she had planted the first seed. A week later, Leah's patience paid off. News broke within the company that HR had launched an investigation into irregularities in Victor's department. The whispers grew louder, and Victor's once polished reputation began to tarnish. Leah stayed in the background, watching as the cracks in his facade grew. The next time Leah ran into Nina, it was at a networking event. Leah had debated whether to attend but decided it was the perfect opportunity to observe her enemy up close. Nina approached her with a wide smile, acting as though nothing had ever come between them. "Leah, it's so good to see you." Leah returned the smile, her heart pounding with the effort it took to stay composed. "You too, Nina. How's work?" Nina's smile faltered for a fraction of a second before she recovered. "Oh, the usual. Busy but rewarding." Leah tilted her head, feigning curiosity. "I heard there's been some drama in Victor's department. Something about an investigation." Nina's face paled slightly, but she quickly forced a laugh. "Oh, that? Just office politics. Nothing serious." Leah nodded, her smile unwavering. "Well, I hope it all works out." As Nina excused herself to mingle with other guests, Leah felt a surge of satisfaction. Nina was nervous, and that was a win in Leah's book. Over the next few weeks, the investigation uncovered enough evidence to halt Nina's promotion. Victor, while not directly implicated, faced scrutiny from his superiors. The tension between him and Nina began to show, their once perfect facade cracking under the pressure. Leah watched it all unfold from a distance, her heart light with the knowledge that she was no longer a passive victim. She had taken control, and it felt incredible. But Leah knew this was just the beginning. Victor and Nina weren't the type to give up easily. They would regroup and find new ways to scheme. and Leah would be ready. For now, though, she allowed herself a moment to celebrate. She wasn't just surviving anymore, she was fighting back, and she was winning. Turning the tables completely. Leah had played her cards carefully up to this point, but she knew it was time to up the ante. Victor and Nina had underestimated her before, and now they had no idea what was coming. Leah wasn't just defending herself anymore, she was about to dismantle the foundation they had built their schemes. Her plan required precision, patience, and just the right amount of misdirection. It started with a tip to an investigative journalist. Leah had remembered a story that had surfaced briefly in her first life: allegations of financial misconduct within Victor's company. Back then, the story had fizzled out before it gained traction, but Leah knew why. Victor had buried it, silencing the sources with threats and payoffs. This time she wouldn't let that happen. Leah reached out anonymously, providing the journalist with just enough information to reopen the investigation. She hinted at hidden documents, irregular transactions, and a trail that led directly to Victor. She even suggested where the journalist might find sources willing to talk. Then, she stepped back and let the pieces fall into place. Within weeks, whispers of financial misconduct began circulating in the business world. Victor's name started appearing in speculative articles, and the tension at his office reached a boiling point. Leah stayed quiet, watching from the sidelines as the storm she had set in motion began to gather strength. But that wasn't all. Leah knew Nina's Achilles heel was her ego. She loved the spotlight and thrived on being admired and envied. So Leah decided to use that against her. Leah created a fake opportunity, a prestigious event that promised to connect up-and-coming professionals with industry leaders. She designed an elaborate invitation, complete with a fabricated guest list full of influential names. Then, she sent it to Nina with a personal message, pretending to be an event organizer who had noticed her exceptional work. It didn't take long for Nina to take the bait. Leah's next move was subtle but effective. She leaked the invitation to a few key players in Victor's office, letting the rumors spread that Nina was stepping on her toes to climb the ladder. By the time the event date arrived, the damage to Nina's reputation was already done, and when Nina showed up at the address only to find an empty venue, her humiliation was complete. Leah couldn't help but feel a twinge of satisfaction. It wasn't just about revenge, it was about reclaiming her power. For too long she had let others dictate her story. Not anymore. Meanwhile, Ethan had become Leah's trusted confidant and ally. When she shared her plans with him, he didn't try to talk her out of them. Instead, he offered his perspective, helping her refine her strategies. "You're hitting them where it hurts," Ethan said one evening as they reviewed her next steps. "But remember, you don't need to destroy yourself in the process." Leah nodded, appreciating his steady presence. "I know, this isn't just about them. It's about taking back control of my life. And you're doing it," Ethan said with a small smile. "Just don't forget what you're fighting for." The final blow came when Leah discovered a hidden weakness in Victor's carefully crafted facade. Through one of her contacts, she learned that Victor had been hiding significant debts, borrowing heavily to fund his lavish lifestyle. If this information went public, it would not only tarnish his image but also jeopardize his standing with the company's board. Leah wasn't sure at first if she should use the information. Part of her worried it was too harsh, too final. But then she remembered the life insurance policy, the cold, calculated way Victor and Nina had planned to erase her. They had shown no mercy, and she owed them none. Leah anonymously forwarded the financial records to the board of Victor's company. She included a detailed analysis outlining how Victor's actions had put the company at risk. It didn't take long for the fallout to begin. Within days, Victor was called into a private meeting with the board. Leah heard through her sources that the discussion had been heated, with accusations flying and tempers flaring. By the end of the week, Victor had been removed from his position, his reputation in shambles. Nina, meanwhile, found herself increasingly isolated. Her association with Victor had made her a target for suspicion, and her colleagues began distancing themselves. She tried to recover, spinning stories to shift the blame, but the damage was done. Leah watched it all unfold with a mix of satisfaction and relief. For the first time in years, she felt free not just from Victor and Nina, but from the shadows of her past. As the dust settled, Leah began focusing on her future. She threw herself into her work, growing her freelance marketing business into a thriving venture. She reconnected with old friends, rebuilt relationships, and created a life that was entirely her own. Ethan became a constant in her life, their bond deepening with each passing day. He had been there through the worst of it, supporting her without judgment, and as Leah moved forward, she realized just how much she valued his presence. One evening, as they sat by the river, watching the city lights reflect on the water, Ethan turned to her. "You've come a long way, Leah," he said softly. "I hope you see that." Leah smiled, her heart full. I do, and I couldn't have done it without you. Ethan shook his head. You did this, Leah. I just reminded you of what you were capable. Leah looked at him, gratitude and something deeper shining in her eyes. Thank you, she said simply, and for the first time, she felt ready to let herself hope for love, for happiness, for a future she could create on her own terms. The story of Leah's triumph wasn't just about revenge. It was about resilience, about finding strength in the face of betrayal and rebuilding a life that had been shattered. Leah had been given a second chance, and she had used it to rewrite her story. As she stood on the balcony of her new apartment, looking out at the city below, Leah felt a sense of peace she hadn't known before. She wasn't just surviving anymore, she was thriving. This time the story was hers. The sun was setting over Riverview, painting the sky in hues of orange and pink. Leah stood on the rooftop of her new apartment building, the wind gently tugging at her hair. The city stretched out before her, alive with energy and possibility. For the first time in a long time, Leah felt truly at peace. Her journey had been anything but easy. Betrayal had shattered her world, forcing her to confront truths about the people she loved and the choices she had made. But from those shattered pieces, Leah had built something stronger. She had fought for her independence, reclaimed her life, and proven to herself that she was more than the sum of her past mistakes. Leah thought back to the beginning, to the day she had woken up in her old room, 7 years in the past. She remembered the confusion, the fear, and the overwhelming sense of opportunity. That version of Leah had been scared, uncertain of how to move forward, but she had taken that first step, and then another, and another, until she had carved a path that was entirely her own. Victor and Nina were no longer shadows in her life. They had tried to control her, to erase her, but Leah had turned their schemes against them. She had exposed Victor's lies and watched as the empire he had built on deception crumbled around him. She had seen Nina's manipulations unravel, leaving her isolated and powerless. Leah hadn't just survived their betrayal, she had emerged victorious. But as satisfying as it was to see justice served, Leah knew her journey wasn't about revenge. It was about growth. She had learned to stand up for herself, to set boundaries, and to value her own worth. She had rediscovered dreams she had once abandoned, and built a future that reflected the person she truly was. One of the most unexpected gifts of this journey was her relationship with Ethan. He had been her anchor through the chaos, offering support without judgment and believing in her when she struggled to believe in herself. Their connection had deepened over time, evolving from friendship into something more. Ethan's steady presence had been a source of comfort, but it was also a reminder of what Leah wanted in a partner, someone who respected her, valued her independence, and encouraged her to pursue her dreams. With Ethan, she felt safe, but she also felt challenged to grow. It was a partnership built on trust and mutual respect, and Leah cherished it deeply. As Leah gazed out at the city, she thought about the people who had helped her along the way, her old friends who had welcomed her back with open arms, the colleagues who had believed in her potential, even the strangers who had offered her kindness when she needed it most. They were all part of her story, and she was grateful for every single one of them. But Leah also knew that her greatest strength had come from within. She had faced her fears, confronted her past, and made the decision to fight for a better future. It wasn't easy, and there were moments when she wanted to give up. But each time she stumbled, she found the courage to stand back up. As the city lights flickered on, Leah took a deep breath, savoring the cool evening air. Her mind wandered to the future, to the endless possibilities that lay ahead. There were still challenges to face and obstacles to overcome. But Leah was no longer afraid of the unknown. She had faced the worst and come out stronger. Whatever came next, she was ready. She thought about her business, which had grown steadily over the past year. It was more than a source of income, it was a symbol of her independence, a testament to her hard work and resilience. Leah had poured her heart into it, and she was proud of what she had accomplished. She also thought about her personal life, the family she wanted to build, and the relationships she wanted to nurture. She had learned the importance of surrounding herself with people who uplifted her and who saw her for who she truly was, and she was determined to create a life filled with love, laughter, and purpose. Leah's phone buzzed, pulling her out of her thoughts. It was a message from Ethan. "Dinner tomorrow? I know a great spot by the river." Leah smiled, her heart warm. She typed a quick reply. "Perfect, I'll meet you there." As she slipped her phone back into her pocket, Leah felt a surge of gratitude. She had been given a second chance, and she had made the most of it. The road hadn't been easy, but it had led her to this moment, a moment of clarity, peace, and hope. Leah turned her gaze back to the horizon, her heart full. The sun had disappeared, leaving the sky awash with stars. It was a new chapter, a new beginning. and this time Leah was the author of her own story. She closed her eyes and whispered a silent promise.